Hi, Smarter News. As we start a brand new week, we could be on the cusp of a breakthrough when it comes to treatment and COVID-19. And I think that's a good way to start a brand new week with some new information about that. We have a host of different stories to get to. It's a really busy news day. But when I stepped back and looked at this long laundry list of stories I wanted to talk to you about, I thought, you know what, this is really the one that I should focus on. And it has to do with this new antiviral pill that could be potentially approved for use when it comes to the treatment of COVID-19. I say potentially because the company has yet to officially petition the FDA, although I'm talking to you Monday morning. It could happen by the time that you actually see this video. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about an antiviral pill by the company Merck. I'm going to show you what it looks like. The company released, just so you can see, we're talking about a pill. Now, the way that this would work is that if you tested positive, and I'm just playing out a scenario, if you tested positive for COVID-19 within the first couple of days, that you would take a regimen of this pill, let's say 2 a day for a couple days. And what the company found is that it reduced serious illness and hospitalization by 50%. And then when it looked at its group of control group versus placebo, there were no deaths in the control group, but the placebo there were. Now, a little context for this. What we're basing this information off is a news release, a press release by Merck that was put out on Friday. So we still don't have the data. We don't have the data peer reviewed. But when the company normally is the case, and I don't know if I should say normally because it's changed a little bit. We're in still a state of health emergency. When a company applies to the FDA for emergency use authorization, that's often when we get to see a lot of the raw data. And that's when I can dig in a little bit more and tell you more about, well, when they're talking about adverse effects, what are they talking about? It looks like it's minimal at this time, but there still is apparently some adverse effects, and we don't know the extent in which, how far this study went as far as who's actually in their control group. It's small at this time, it's several hundred people in this final phase, but the results were promising enough for the company to say, hey, we're going to stop this. We're going to appeal to the FDA. I've been watching this story for more than a year now, and we have hesitated to do further reporting on it because we're still waiting for the research. But you should know the clinical trials began last year. We're now in this phase 3 trial, and now we're going to see what's going to happen with the FDA. We don't know what this means potentially for pregnant women. We don't know what this means if you've been vaccinated, if you could potentially take this pill on top of it. But this could be a real change. Let me just point this out to you. Let's say you tested positive for COVID-19. You have relatively mild symptoms. You get to call your doctor. Your doctor says, I'm going to prescribe you this antiviral pill. It reduces your symptoms. In a week or so, you're better. You don't have to go to the doctors to be looked at. You're not moving around your community at that point because, by the way, you took an at-home test. So you see some of these advancements that we're seeing over the last several weeks and months really could change the way that we're approaching COVID-19. And I think that's important to know. A couple things. We're getting this information at the same time we're seeing a new vaccine mandate announced by the state of California. That would be for children going to school in the public schools there. This was announced on Friday. What's interesting about this is that it's similar in the way to the mandate that was announced by the federal government by President Biden, in that we have the announcement taking place, but we don't have the details. By the way, we still don't have the details from the federal government, what that mandate would be for companies of 100 people or more. How exactly would that be enforced? What exactly would that look like? That's one of the other reasons you haven't necessarily seen a card stack on that, because I don't have the information to even know what would be the legal conflicts. We don't even know what it would be. We still don't have specifics. So although the state of California became the first state to announce this, we still don't have the details. We also don't have any vaccines officially approved for young kids, like kindergartners. That, by the way, the FDA could look at by the end of this month, but we still don't have even that. So we're seeing a confluence of news with some different information, and we're waiting for information and specifics on a lot. I'm waiting for data when it comes to this antiviral pill. I'm waiting for more information on these vaccine mandates. In the meantime, what does COVID-19 even look like in America right now? I want to show you, well, let's see, what should we go to first? Let me show you this. This is what the CDC put out just on Friday. And what I want you to look at, this is really giving us a whole look at the pandemic. If you see to the far right, you see that we're actually seeing declining cases in the United States. Now, this is important because if I look back in October of last year, we were actually seeing a little bit of an uptick. So we're seeing a decline in cases. That's important. We're starting to see a decline in hospitalizations and deaths. We know that's lagging. So that's important to note. But remember last week I told you that there's been some different regional stories. There's been so much focus on the South and the spread of COVID-19 in the South. But let me show you what we saw from the Texas governor just over the weekend. We saw this announcement that COVID hospitalizations are going down more rapidly today. They're lowest in 2 months. You're seeing a lower positivity rate in the state of Texas. At the same time, here's the lead story in the Associated Press today that tells us a little bit about what's happening in a different part of the country, New England. We're seeing virus rates surge there, according to the Associated Press. Took a little bit of a closer look, but that's something I'm going to be paying close attention to, because we saw that pattern last year, where you saw some, kind of these higher rates of COVID-19 in the South and during the summer, and then you saw the whole country take another surge. If we go back and we can see that chart again. So I'll be curious if we see this regional story take place. One other thing I want to point out to you is, you remember last week I covered this story, and it was an interesting story in the New York Times that took a look at the partisan divide of COVID-19, making the argument that red states, President Trump voters, would be more likely to have severe cases of COVID-19. Take a look at the newsletter this morning. I want to show you this because this is so interesting. This is the same newsletter, COVID in Retreat. And there's some fascinating things in this newsletter talking about a 2-month cycle of COVID surges, and that in 60 days, we start seeing these cycles repeat. One of you asked, well, why do you even care about what the New York Times says? The reason why I care is because the New York Times is so big, it drives stories for other news agencies. So if they do a story, then you can see it reported on even in your local news. So I think it's important. To see these two different headlines, though, shows you how quickly the news cycle is changing. And that's important to note. I want to show you something else when it comes to something you should know today. And this sort of ties in strangely to what we're talking about with COVID-19. The Supreme Court is back in session today. For the most part, all of the justices will be there. This gives you an idea of the way that different media organizations are covering this. MSNBC is saying Supreme Court will likely kill Roe v. Wade, abortion law, and gun restriction laws this term. The Supreme Court's conservatives cook up a stew of abortion, guns, religion, and more. That's NPR's headline. What's important to know is that the Supreme Court is in session. They have a lot of really important cases. And yes, the court makeup would be, quote unquote, more conservative than in the past, because we had a Republican president appoint justices. And that's how we would call those justices more conservative, although they themselves may not align that way. What's really important to know about the Supreme Court session, yes, a lot of big cases are going to be taken up, but we're not going to get decisions on any of those cases really until June, so next summer. So there's a long process for that, to know that that's happening. The other thing to know about the court so far is that they've been somewhat unpredictable about exactly how they're going to rule on what would be previously reported as predictable decisions. So something just to keep in mind. Not every justice is going to be in the Supreme Court, though, in session, in person. Justice Kavanaugh tested positive for COVID-19, so he's not going to be there. He has no symptoms. He's been vaccinated. What's interesting, and how I'm going to tie this all in, is just remember this. When you start seeing cases go up, the most important questions we have to ask, or if we do see cases go up, you never know what's going to happen. The most important question we can ask is that someone that just has mild symptoms, a cold, or is asymptomatic, or is that someone with severe symptoms that's requiring hospitalizations and deaths? It's really important to make that distinction, especially even as we see cases go up in New England. We know that New England has a higher vaccination rates. So are we seeing cases go up with more severe cases? Are we seeing cases go up, but we're seeing hospitals not at a level that's concerning? That's going to be so important to watch this fall, because we do have swaths of the country where the vaccination rates are higher and lower in others. So that's a little bit of a rundown, just what's happening. These are some big stories in the United States. I have a whole host of foreign policy stories. I have my globos, like I want to talk about it so bad. But I'm actually going to hold this to tomorrow, and we're going to talk more about some foreign policy stories tomorrow. So I love your questions and comments. As always, let me know. I'm going to put a couple of these different charts and what I use in this video underneath the video on our website if you'd like to access it. But questions and comments, always let me know, and more on smarternews.com. But hope this gets you started on a Monday morning and gets you off to a great week. All right, Smart News. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.